Sir. Assalamu alaikum, sir. My name is Hajra, and my project is mini games. This is basically a series of short games that I decided to computerize because whenever we used to be in the hostel, and there were internet issues, we entertained ourselves with these games. It was kind of tedious, making tables on the paper and keeping score. So I decided to computerize it through my project. सबसे पहले मेरा my level सबसे पहले I would like to explain why I chose a software project instead of a hardware one. It's mostly because I wanted to implement what I learned in this course in more creative ways, and it also allowed me to get into the depth of the C language, and I had to come up with very creative solutions because to overcome those constraints. It was cost effective, and I got to learn important programming skills like file handling and a very basic implementation of the Win32 API. So my level one is very simple. It's rock, paper, scissors. And whenever we are starting a game, we always play that to kind of, get into a competitive environment. And it's not, it's a game of chance. It doesn't require any strategy. So I made it through a simple random number generator. The code was very simple. When I chose this as a level one, I didn't think it would be this simple, but with my programming skills developing for as the course proceeded, this turned out to be a lot simpler. Anyway, so what my code does is it first of all it inputs the user choice. The user has to select from rock, paper, or scissor. If the input is not valid, that is, if the user hasn't selected a valid, hasn't pressed a valid key, then my program will go back to the input button. It will display an error message and it will go back to the input line. Then finally, when the user has entered a valid option, what it does is that it assigns a variable to that choice. So I assigned variables to rock, paper, and scissor because it was easier to compare them with each other. So my ID for rock was 0, for paper was 1, and for scissor was 2. Now, using the rand function, I generated a random number for the computer choice, and basically, I generated numbers from 0 to 1 to 0 to through 2, and then assigned them the respective IDs, rock, paper, and scissor, and then compared them. And if the like, I think everyone knows the basic rules of rock, paper, and scissor. So if I compared them, and if the computer choice was greater than the user choice, then the computer or my host Lenny won. And if the computer choice was smaller than the user choice, then the user won. There was also the situation where both the user and the computer got the same option. Both of them chose rock or both of them chose paper. So uske liye there's this draw option, and both of them get equal points. The next level is riddles. So this was very complicated. I think I had the most difficult time coding this. So what my program basically does is that it first of all it reads a file. It sets a file pointer to the first line of a file, and what it does is it accesses the file and reads it line by line. When it reads the first line, it stores that function in a string, and then using the strtod function, what it does is what I had done in my files was that I had assigned a riddle ID to each riddle, and what each line is read, and then this function separates the riddle ID from the riddle itself, and it compares the riddle ID to a random number that I had generated earlier. If they are the same, then the riddle is printed to the user. If they're not the same, then the next line is read, and the lines are read till the riddle ID is the same as the random number generated. This allowed me to generate multiple different kinds of riddles to the user. And then the user inputs the answer. And then I had a separate file. Then I read a separate file which contained all the answers. Again, the same process was repeated. The string, the file line was stored into the into a string, and then it was separate. The riddle ID and the answer was separated. The riddle ID was compared with the random number. If it was the same as the random number, then the answer was compared to the input answer. If the input answer was the same, then the user was given points. Otherwise, the user was not. This level also had a time limit. The user had to answer as many riddles as possible in the in the first 30 seconds. So to implement that, I used the time.h library and time functions. At the end of each iteration, I checked if the time limit was greater, the time difference was greater than 30. If it was, the loop would break. My last level was bingo. Bingo was it wasn't. I think it was easier to code than file handling, but it was still it still gave me a hard time. So what basically happens in bingo is that the user and the player gets an option to either fill their bingo table themselves or autofill it. If the user decides to fill the table themselves, then I had to make sure that any value that they were entering was not repeated. So after the user inputs each value, a search algorithm is implemented till the last value that was entered. And if the value that the user just entered is a repeat value, then my program gives an error message and takes the input again. Similarly, if the user chooses the autofill option, I had to make sure I was generating random numbers to fill that table. And I had to make sure that the random numbers being generated were not repetitive. So for that, each time a random number was generated, a search algorithm was implemented. And if the number that has been generated was being repeated, then what happened was that the number was generated again and again and again till the rand function gave me a unique number. So that's how I made the autofill functionality. After that, my tables are displayed to the user. Both of the players have to carefully search through their tables, and a random number is generated after every turn. What happens is that the computer asks for input. It asks if the number that has been generated, is it present in the table or not? If it's not present in the table and the player hasn't looked carefully or is trying to cheat, then and they press yes, what happens is that my program gives a warning for that player and says that you shouldn't cheat. And then if the number, however, if the number is present and they still overlook it, I counted that and say that their number is not present. I counted that as a mistake on the user's part and on the player's part, and that's like their disadvantage. They can't go back and mark that number as in their bingo table. So basically, what my game does is when the whole table is marked, the player whose table is marked first wins. And that's about it. Now I would like to show you my code.
Kindly zoom your code so that I can see your code. ठीक है, थोड़ा सा इसको zoom कर दें.
सर सर मैं कोड भी एक्सप्लेन करूं और उसके बाद आउटपुट दिखाऊं?
जी जी, जो बेसिक फंक्शन कोड की वो एक्सप्लेन कर दें.
जी सर. अच्छा, okay sir, so this is my main function, and it's basically printing the interactive part that I have added into my program. Other than that, it's doing is it's calculating the points at the end of the game. So that's what it does. And in the main function, I have first called the level 1 rock paper scissors, and the rock paper scissors is a separate function beneath, in which this whole code that you see here, the printf statements, I have used them I have used them to display the instructions. Then this is where my I use case statements and if else statements to calculate if the user won or my host won the game. After that, my riddles function is called, and the riddles function, this is where it is. Again, this is in the printf statements I printed the instructions. This is where I'm initializing the clocks, and then here this is my file. This is my file path. I defined it, and here I'm checking if the number is equal to the riddle ID or not. As you can see, I'm using the strtod function, and then I'm closing the file, then reading the answers file, and that's about it. And then again, I'm calculating the points according to how many answers how many riddles were answered correctly. The more the player answers correctly, the more points they get. And then I call my bingo function, which is right here. What it does is, first of all, it takes the autofill, or it takes in the input and asks the user if they want to autofill it or if they want to fill the table themselves. If the user does not choose a valid option, then I have used a do while loop to check that they do choose a valid option, and the loop is not exited until the user has entered a valid option. This extra get char here is to flush the enter value, because whenever I pressed enter after my input, it started giving me very random behavior, and errors were introduced into my program. And then I have asked, here I have, this is my whole search algorithm. I have used flags to make sure that I have used flags, and as soon as my program encounters a number that has already been repeated, my repetition flag becomes 1 and it breaks. And if my repetition flag is 1, my loop is continued. The user has to input a number again. I use the same logic for random function, except here, instead of taking input, I'm just generating a random number. I'm generating the numbers between 1 and 32 because my table is a 4x4 table, and to make the game I didn't want the game to get too long and generate a lot of random numbers, so I limited it to 32. And then the same thing is happening for the second player, and then this is where my search algorithms are implemented again. So my program asks the user for input. It asks if the number the random number that has been generated, if it's in the player 1's table or not, and if it's in player 2's player two's table or not. And then this is my search algorithm. If the number that has been generated is not found in this search algorithm, then there's a warning printed for the user, for the player. I have created a separate function for that cheat that's down below, and this is where I'm calculating the points. Actually this is where I'm calculating if the whole array has become null or not, the 2D array. So what happens here is that if so yes, what's happening here is another search algorithm is implemented. If any value is not equal to 0 in the array, then P1, my win flag becomes 1. It becomes false basically. My 0 is true and 1 is false. And if it is true, then it remains 0. So this is where I'm calculating if my flag is 1. Wait, what have I done? Yes, if my flag is 1, I reset it to 0. If my flag is 0, that means no non-zero value was found. I set the win flag to 2, and my loop doesn't break until and unless at least one of the flags P1 win and P2 win becomes non-zero. And then yes, this is where I'm calculating the points, and then this is the function, the cheat function, which is called whenever the player tries to cheat. This is my function for the starting, the little graphic that I added, and this is another function for, these functions are for the graphics, the visual effects that I tried to add in my console application. So that was all for my code. Now I will start, I will display the output. So this is the graphic effect. And then this is my host, Lenny. I basically added him to make the game more interactive. Then my program takes input of the names. I'm just going to input my brother's name. And then my host, Lenny, talks about the first level of the game. I have added this little loading graphic, and then the instructions for the first round I printed. So in the first round, I have to choose between rock, paper, and scissors. I'll choose rock. Now, if I give an invalid input, which not R, not P, not S, O, what happens is that this message box is displayed. Then my program takes input till I enter a valid input. So the last 2 rounds have been a draw and paper, scissors, and again this round I won. And then so I play 3 rounds of rock, paper, scissors with the host Lenny, and then the second player plays 3 rounds. So it's rock, paper, and scissors, and basic. So I won this round. Now now the screen is cleared, and my host Lenny talks about the second round. Again, the same graphic, the instructions for the second round, and my second round is about to start. So these are the riddles. These are the riddles, and I will try to answer them correctly. Apparently that's the wrong answer. I don't know. Clock, I think. I have no idea. Oh yes, sponge. And then back. So the 30 seconds are over, and now it's the second player's turn. Promise, wrong answer. Darkness, I think. I have, oh yeah, I know this one. And then window. Yeah, the correct answer. The same, it was repeated, and my brother won this round. So this round is over, and I use the system pause function to kind of give the players a little break. Now my host gives the orientation for the third round. And here I'll choose the option 1 where I can fill the table myself. So 1, 2, 3, and if I choose a value that has already been repeated, for example, I'll write 4 here, which has already been repeated. It will give me a little prompt, enter again and don't repeat. So I'll choose 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. And for player 2, I'll just choose the autofill option. And these are my tables and they have been printed. Now I'll check if 24 is in the tables. It's in neither of the tables, but I'll press yes for the second player. So, okay, I think it was, yes, it was there. I didn't see it. So, and then 20 is in, it's not in table 1, but it is in table 2. So I'm going to press yes for both of them. Now this, my program prints a warning for table for player 1 because they were trying to cheat. So whenever so my value turns to X if the number is found, that particular number in my table turns to X. So whichever player's whole table turns to X's first, it wins. Now it's going to be a very long game if I play it, all of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a screen recording that I did when I was testing the program. It's in my PPT. Here it is. Okay. Yes, here we go.
Okay, एक क्वेश्चन है आपसे.
जी सर.
अच्छा, what is recursive functions? Recursive function क्या होते हैं? कुछ उसके बारे में आप बता सकती?
Sir, मुझे नहीं पता. And as long as I remember, Sir Jodhat said that I'm not going to teach you recursion.
Okay. अभी तक उन्होंने नहीं पढ़ाई आपको recursive function और recursion नहीं पढ़ाई.
नहीं sir, उन्होंने कहा था I feel that recursion is way too advanced for you guys, so I'm not going to teach it to you.
Okay, ठीक है, सही है. That's all. क्वेश्चन कोई भी नहीं है क्योंकि आपने इतना अच्छा एक्सप्लेन किया है कि कोई क्वेश्चन इसके बाद बाकी नहीं रह जाता. प्रेजेंटेशन अच्छी थी, डेमो भी अच्छा था, और बस ये एक थोड़ी सी कमी थी कि आपने इसको अगर लेकिन वो चीज़ आपने अच्छी जो आपने आउटपुट दिखाई है उससे चीज़ें वो सारी कवर कर ली थी आपने.
गुड, शाबाश.
हाँ हाँ, नहीं कोई मसला नहीं है उसका, लेकिन वो आपने चीज़ को कवर किया उसको आपने, और फ्लो चार्ट्स को आपने काफ़ी अच्छा एक्सप्लेन किया लेवल 1, 2 और 3 को, और शाबाश, वेल डन.
सर मैंने जीयूआई थोड़ा सा इम्प्रूव करने की कोशिश की थी, मैं आपको दिखा दूं.
नहीं बस ठीक है, सही है.
थैंक यू.
ओके, थैंक यू क्योंकि काफ़ी लंबा हो गया, 30 मिनट आप पे लग गए हैं इस वजह से ना.
सर थैंक यू.
ओके जी, खुदा हाफिज.
सर.